Welcome to tonight's Down on the Corner, episode 34, believe it or not. We are excited to welcome a very special guest who's made a lasting impact on baseball, both as a player and a coach. Tonight, we're joined by Bob Apodaca, a former major league pitcher for the New York Mets from 1973 to 1977, known for his outstanding 1975 season where he led the bullpen with 13 saves and a 1.49 ERA. Bob's Met career was marked by resilience and skill. After an injury in 1978, he transitioned into coaching, starting with the Mets minor league affiliates from his time as a pitching coach for the Columbia Mets, where he led his staff to a 90-42 record. To his role later on as a Mets major league pitching coach from 1996 to 1999, he played a pivotal part in developing pitching talent at every single level. His leadership in the Mets system helped shape the future of big league pitchers. Following his time with the Mets, he continued to make an impact in baseball, notably with the Colorado Rockies, where he coached the pitching staff through what is really a challenging stadium and for a hitter-friendly Coors Field, but he helped guide Ubaldo Jiménez to the franchise first and only no-hitter in 2010. So as always, I start off the questioning, and then we'll turn it over to the Zoom room, who usually asks a lot better questions than I do. We ask that you guys all keep it muted until the end, and then you'll use the raise hand function, or you'll just do that, and we'll call on you. So let's start it off with Bobby. So, you began your career as a third baseman before converting to a pitcher. What was that transition like for you? And who was the person that said, you know what, you should be a pitcher?
Back in junior college, I went from high school to junior college. A very a very baseball oriented junior college, maybe the number one junior college in the state of California, at Cerritos Junior College, and they had won I don't know several state titles. And the year before I got there, they were 40-0, and I was there 2 years, and the year after I left, they were 41-1. So, but my 2 years, they weren't quite that good. But it was the coach who saw me playing third base and diving all over the place and knocking balls down and putting my body in front of it. He says, "Bob, I really love the way you play this game." He says, "But I see two minuses." And I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to get words of advice from the number one college coach in the world. And he said, "Bob, you can't hit and you can't run. And if that doesn't sound like a pitcher, I don't know what does." Those his exact words.
Oh, wow. So you and I spoke about this when I was doing the book on the 1973 Mets. You make your debut in the heat of a pennant race. Tell me what that was like, what your thoughts on that debut and just being around a team that was, on the precipice of getting to the playoffs.
Well, got to know several players, having gone to the major league camp in spring training. So, um, but other than that, I was in AAA all year in '73 and finished the season there. Several of my teammates in Tidewater were called up. The Dave Schnicks, Lute Barnes, I think Tommy Moore, Johnny Glass, Buzz Capra had already been called up. So there were several players that preceded me up there. But I wasn't on the major league roster. So I drove back to California. And so that took about 5, 6 days. And then I spent another week at home just decompressing from the season. And then I got a call from Bob Schaefer, general manager. And he said, "We've had an injury and we need you to fly to Pittsburgh." And I said, "You got the right number." And so I got on the first flight that I could possibly get. And I think I arrived at the Pittsburgh Hilton, around 10 o'clock, 10:30. Got to the hotel, which was near the ballpark, matter of fact, and the team hadn't come back yet. I think the Mets got trounced the game that I got there, and so I saw the players one by one as they came in, and so just greeting them, enjoying the opportunity to be there. I'm in a major league hotel now. I'm not at Motel 6. I'm at the Pittsburgh Hilton. So I go to the ballpark. To make a long story short, I go to the ballpark the next day and just try to have a routine with my feet barely touching the ground and looking at the stadium. It's got 3, 4 decks, and it's immense. And we're playing the Lumber Company, the Pittsburgh Pirates, who I've seen, and I knew all their players because I was a baseball fan, and I knew what they were capable of. But I didn't know what was in store for me because I really hadn't touched a baseball. I hadn't put baseball stuff on in 2 weeks. So I went down to the bullpen and just was excited to be there and watch the game. I didn't just hang around. I really watched the game intently. And I think we were down 4-1, and then we scored 5 to go ahead 6-4. And the phone rings down the bullpen to get me up. I says, "Whoa, okay." So you can't duplicate, you cannot replicate the nervous energy that goes through a human body when something like that is happening. Not just for you, but who you're playing for and what it means. Because this game later on was called one of the most important games in the Mets catching and then surpassing the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Yeah.
Thank God for Buzz Capra, because after I came in and walked the 2 guys I faced, he came in, and let me tell you, he wasn't facing a little league lineup. He was facing some lumber. So kudos to Buzz Capra to get out of the jam that I put him in. And I think it went down to a 3-2 count with the bases loaded, and he got Manny Sanguillen to pop up.
Yep.
So
So it's also interesting you mentioned that you also were a fan of the game. So I have to imagine getting your first win against a guy named Bob Gibson had to be a tremendous thrill. Walk me through that and that moment and that first win for a pitcher. How does that shape your confidence going forward?
well, yeah, Bob Gibson in St. Louis. I think it was an emergency start for me. I think John Matlack had gotten hurt. I think he was the scheduled pitcher for that game. Now, this is 1974. It's not 1964 when Bob Gibson was Bob Gibson. So this might have been Gibson's last year, but it doesn't matter. He's Bob Gibson. And he didn't throw quite as hard as he did back in his heyday, but he still could pitch. And so it was kind of a scoreless game, and that's what I really loved. I hated to get too big of a lead too soon. I wanted those really nip and tuck type games, really focused you to focus on every pitch. And so it was a close game. I got my first big league hit off of Bob Gibson also. If I described it, it was a 99 hopper that went through the hole at shortstop, aided by AstroTurf. But I think I went 5 or 6. I can't really remember if it was 5 or 6. I didn't give up. I don't believe I gave up a run. I don't believe I did, but we held on to that win, and I gave that ball to my mother, and all my memorabilia I gave to my mother. So it was something that was you can't imagine the feeling that goes through. You think back of the people that helped you get to where you were at that moment in time, the hard work it took to get there, the doubters that you didn't possess enough skill or talent to be at this level. So I always had to prove, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. And so it always comes down to you against somebody else. So, and that's what sports is. So, again, maybe the second highlight of my life was that first win.
I mean, that rookie season, you had a really good rookie season in 74 with the Mets. You got 3 saves, you had a 3.5 ERA. Also, there were still some of those veterans around, guys like Tug McGraw and obviously, Seaver. How did those guys, help you to understand what it took to play at the major league level?
Observing, not asking a ton of questions, asking good questions when it needed to be asked, but going to the ballpark early, seeing what they do, preparing for a game 3-4 hours before we were even on the field, watching how they conduct themselves, listening to their conversation. If you listen closely, you're going to get some nuggets. You're going to get some real good nuggets on, like this guy. Hey, they're doing a scouting report right there, playing. What would they play? They would play bridge. Sadecki would be in on it. Seaver was there. Kuzman was there, and I think Matlack might have been the fourth. And so just listening to them. And so if you paid attention and shut up and don't ask stupid questions, then you really, that it's an opportunity to really come with some wisdom, learn some wisdom. So I just would watch them, watch how they conditioned, how each and every one of them had different ways of conditioning themselves, not just the sprints and the running, but how else they did to maintain certain things, how well they took care of themselves after the game, before the game. True professionals, these guys, and you wonder why they stayed in the game so long, because they realize this is their body, this is their ticket, this is they treat it like stock. They have stock in themselves, and it's your investment, and so they treated their investment very well.
It's interesting you say that because then you got to see, granted 2000s, the early 2000s to 2010 is in baseball, every 10 years is like light years. But what did you notice, towards the tail end of your coaching career? Did you see that same attention by the younger players coming up to just, reflect and notice and listen and not say anything? Or was it a different type of ball player?
A much different player. Coaches who coached back when I played would have to learn completely different methods of coaching. And I don't mean the X's and O's. I mean how to communicate, how to gain. Number one, a coach is like a teacher in front of a classroom. You be a boring teacher, you're not going to gain their attention, and definitely you're not going to earn their trust. So that's number one: is to gain their trust, that your sole reason for being there is for them, and you will do anything for them as long as you put ideas together. It can't be a one-way street. It's got to be ideas coming out of your mouth, coming out of my mouth. Let's mix it together and see what we come up with. And so that was number one. And I learned from the best. I learned from Mel Stottlemyre, and he was somebody that I idolized when I was a minor league coach with the Mets, and I would go to major league camp, and I just watched how the players adored him because he treated each player individually like men, and with respect. They respected him back. They trusted him. And I tried to be somewhat, not reaching that pinnacle, but attempting to be that type of man.
So 1975, you have that standout season, career year. You lead the Mets bullpen with 13 saves and a 1.49 ERA, which right now would make you a millionaire if you were playing the game today. What were some of the things that clicked that year and that season that just enabled you to put together that type of season?
I think learning from my rookie year and gaining that confidence. It wasn't all perfect 1975 because I left spring training with a little bit of ouchie in the elbow. So I missed about the first 4 weeks of the season, and I stayed down in an extended program. And maybe the best thing that ever happened to me. And I got to the point where I got up to 5-6 innings pitching down in Florida So I really got in tremendous shape as far as being able to expand all my pitches, gain some, where I could go an extended period of time. So when I was called up and met the team in Montreal, and it was about 30 some degrees. First game I got in, I pitched 3 innings and faced 9 guys. So I was ready to perform. And I was healthy the rest of that year. I stayed healthy. So any talent that I had was always because of the count didn't dictate what pitch I was going to throw. I could throw any of my pitches and have the confidence that I could locate with movement. And that was my strength. And that was the one year, even though I had decent years after 76, the ERA was decent. But the other year, I had some elbow issues. So, but 75 was absolutely, if I needed it there, it got there. If I needed it over here, it got there. Like I faced Willie Stargell maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 times, never got a hit. And I just said, I'm just going to go after this big guy. And I need to throw it there. Boom, it went there. And I needed to throw it there. It went there. I need to bounce this curveball. It went there. So it's just one of those years where confidence and being healthy and just the ability to do those things made it a very, very, very special year.
You also got to pitch to Jerry Grody, who, may be one of the most underrated defensive catchers of that era. I mean, the people that played with him recognized how good he was, but he's one of those names that kind of gets lost. I think Johnny Bench said it best. He said that if Jerry Grody was a Cincinnati Red, he'd be a third base. That Johnny Bench would be a third baseman.
Yeah.
What made Grody such a good catcher?
Once you gained his confidence, oh my God, he was like a bodyguard. He protected you, and he did his homework. He knew that opposition backwards and forwards, but he knew you. He knew what you could do in certain counts. He knew what you could do on this side of the plate. What does he do best on this side of the plate? What does he do best on this side of the plate? But the best advice I got was my rookie year from Tom Seaver before I got to that relationship with Jerry. And he said, Bob, Jerry's going to try and intimidate you. And if you want to throw a pitch and you shake him off, he's going to come out to the mound and he's going to get in your face. He says, if you want to gain his respect, you got to look him in the eye and you got to stand up to him. And I couldn't believe I was hearing this. And he said, okay. And sure enough, a game came where I was confident because you got to be committed to a pitch that you're going to throw. You can't just, okay, that sounds good. No, you got to be committed. So I was committed to a certain pitch and he wanted to do something else. And so he put down the sign, I shook it off. He put down the same sign, I shook him off. And then he called timeout. And you can see Jerry, he'd always put that mask on top of his head and come walking out like a Brahma bull. And he said, "Do you see that sign I put down?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That wasn't the sign I wanted." I said, "Get back there and put that sign down." So he turned around and put that sign down, and we had success. And from that point on, we were good friends. We golfed. His wife, my wife, good friends. And he was so more interested in his staff than his own offensive prowess. It wasn't until Del Unser and they became extremely good friends that you saw much more offensive Jerry Grody come into play. And they really hit it off. But Jerry, I have to agree with Mr. Bench that he might have been the best defensive catcher I ever threw to or I ever saw.
Another thing that's fairly interesting, and you see it more so now than ever because of the way the game has evolved and how important the bullpen is, but it's also the bullpen dynamics and just having different looks in the pen from different type of pitchers. What was it, about, some of the bullpens that you coached that made them special because, and the makeup and now baseball's actually become a lot more collaborative. Like guys will sit in the bullpen and they'll talk pitching and they'll teach each other's different pitches. What is the most important ingredient into the, mix of a bullpen, in your
Well, you
opinion?
do have to have some variety. Uh, Maybe the best bullpen I ever had was the bullpen that I had with the Colorado Rockies in 2007 when we went to the World Series. And, we had Manny Corpus, sidearm, hard sinking guy. We had Brian Fuentes, left-hander, who gave up a lot of fly balls, but power high, where he probably was one of the few or the first guys who could pitch very effectively high in the strike zone. So he had a lot of strikeouts, a lot of fly balls. But then we had guys like Matt Hergis, Taylor Buchholz, LaTroy Hawkins, um, well, oh gosh, left-hand pitcher for the Giants back in the 90s. He won 3 World Series. We got him from the Kansas City Royals. Uh, Big, tall left-hander, threw hard, but we had variety. And the makeup, or a guy you wouldn't be afraid with everything to lose, that you could put it into a game because his insides told you he could withstand this. He wasn't going to wilt under the hot sun. This man could control his emotions. Not enough is done to that. It's all talent. It's not all talent. It's what makes you tick, what drives you. So you see guys who have less talent who get more out of their ability. And we had a staff like that, a bullpen staff like that we could throw anybody into any situation and feel good about it. That way you don't always go to the same 3, 4 guys. Now, after the course of a season, those guys are worn out. And so you really have to monitor that. So I would say that was one of the major pluses that we had. And we always tried. Bobby Valentine was a big guy in looking for variety. I mean, he was a big Rick Reed fan, and so was
Yeah.
I, because I had Rick Reed in AAA, but he was kind of ostracized from the major leagues. But this guy, he was light, Greg Maddux light. He was exactly like Greg Maddux. His movement was tremendous. Breaking ball, changeup, both sides of the plate. And he made a name for himself from what Bobby went out on a limb and brought him to the Mets. And he made a name for himself and had a very successful year, not only with the Mets, but then I think with the Minnesota Twins.
Twins. You take a look and in terms of longevity, you didn't have that because of injuries. Are there any regrets when you have that talent and it's taken away from you because of injury?
Me personally,
Yeah.
yeah, you tend to think back, what might have been. Um, I The year before I got hurt, that I blew my elbow out, the Tommy John. I'm living in New York, and Craig Swan and I are working out. I mean, we worked out that winter, and we went on a strengthening program, total body, upper, lower, arm, shoulder, everything. So I go to spring training that year, and Tom McKenna, the head trainer, he would always test you. As soon as you got in there, you'd get on your back and you'd put your arm down, and he would get you in range of motions, and then you'd push against him. Well, he was holding me, and I threw him off of me. He says, "Oh my God, what'd you do this off season?" Says Tommy, I worked hard. He says, oh, God, your strength is ridiculous. Well, you can strengthen muscles. You can't strengthen ligaments. You can't strengthen tendons. I just think I got to the point where I was too strong for my own body. And the human body can only take so much. And just one pitch just turned my life around as far as an athlete. But that door closed, pitching coach, because I think I was able to transform into a coach is because I loved baseball. I was a fan of baseball. I loved learning baseball. And I think just if I didn't have that, if I just played the game just to make money, then I don't think that would have opened the door for me to be a pitching coach.
Do you think the fact that you were still fairly young when you went to coaching helped you establish those relationships, like you said, which is the most important thing? And like you said, for a teacher, so you're a young guy, not that far removed from the game, that
Right.
maybe you held that attention of those young pitchers a lot more than a guy that might have played for 15 years.
Yeah, looking back, I might have gotten respect from the young players that I was, because I was in Little Falls my first year. And I might have gotten the respect because I was just off the playing field. But thinking back, I only knew how to take care of myself, what I needed to do. Now I'm having to work with 10, 12 young men as far as knowing the ins and outs of a pitching delivery. So now this is on the job training. Did I help somebody? I just hope I didn't hurt anybody. That their progress was regressed because of the lack of experience. So I put it upon myself that I realized I needed to learn a hell of a lot more than I needed as far as to communicate. And so that's why I talked to the Al Jacksons and the Mels and listened and observed, asked questions, but not pain in the butt questions, but listened more and talked to other players and slowly but surely started learning the craft. And I think early I was kind of 50-50 as far as helping, hurting. And I regret that time because I never wanted to hurt anybody as far as progress. But to be good at anything, it's going to take time. And so I tried, and I didn't want to ever stop learning. That was my credo, was never try to stop learning.
I have a few more for you, then we'll turn it over to the Zoom room. And you mentioned asking guys like Al Jackson and other guys and Mel. You got to coach in a place where a lot of people didn't get to coach. All right. And with that, there were inherent issues. Colorado, that ball flies out of there.
Yeah.
So you can't ask anybody about that because the guys that you knew, they never played there. Did the pitchers have to pitch differently in Colorado? And what do you do?
They can't pitch any different from what they possess, what they do best. They just have to adjust to what altitude does to the baseball. They have to make adjustments. Jeff Francis maybe put it best because he was one of the better pitchers I had in my 10 years there. Left-handed pitcher, Canadian kid, big curveball, outstanding changeup. High could throw the high fastball. Learned how to pitch low. But he always said when I came back off the road, my curveball on the road was big and sharp. Big, had some teeth, had some fangs to it. But when I got on at home, I would have to use the curveball maybe a little less, not emphasize it as much, but I would have to really focus even lower and maybe hit the back of home plate, try to hit the back of home plate was his sights. So because curveball was maybe most affected by the altitude. Slider, because it's more side to side, not as affected. Split finger, not as much, because basically it's a changeup that does go down a little bit. The straight change, always a great pitch. Fastball's good in Mount Everest or Death Valley. So if you could still pitch high at altitude if you had velocity. So it's learning your pitcher's strength, him not trying to do anything different, because the temptation is there. You're going to make great pitches and not get rewarded for them. Somebody's going to put a swing on and the ball's going to go and it's not going to come back. But the other team has to pitch there too. We just have to be better than that other team. And so we would win games before we even played the games, because there would be guys that all of a sudden had the 48-hour flu when they were coming into Denver, and so they would miss their start in Denver. So and then the team always hit well, so run scoring was never an issue. So, but it was whatever type of pitcher you were, you had to be that type of pitcher. Just be even more consistent with that.
I have one more question, then we're going to turn it over to the Zoom room, because they're all messaging me that I'm stealing all their questions. So I'll ask one more question, then we'll turn it over. So, you take a look, and even at the youth level, the amount of technology that is available to a 15U pitcher is incredible, whether it be the Dare system, which will show every point of release and stress on their body, as to spin rotation and velocity and location. Looking back, if Bob Apodaca was born 35 years later, what type of pitcher do you think you would be? Because you were definitely a student of the game. If you had all this technology available to you, how do you think it would have impacted your career?
Well, I would get a bird's eye view of how I executed pitches. Was there a better way of executing? Finger, hand position, grip, things of that nature. Technology wasn't going to help me throw it harder. Technology might have maybe gained an inch or two as far as movement. So I think information is great. I think all this thing that you just mentioned are pitching tools. They're not necessities. They're pitching tools. What do you do with this information? What do you and the coach do with that? Players are getting all this information in high schools and colleges now, because their budget is so immense in some of these colleges that they have every gizmo you can imagine. And so they're talking a lot. Hell, my last year was like 2019, 2020. I went 20, but that was the COVID year, and so it was canceled. But 19, I mean, we're talking, and I'm saying, what language? I says, boy, I came up at the right time, because the problem I have with the computer. Well, I was having the language that they were talking about. I said, oh my God. Says, I don't need a machine to tell me this guy can pitch up in the strike zone because his spin rate is high. I don't need this gizmo to tell me that this guy has some teeth on his curveball. I can see that he's got teeth on his curveball, or I can help him get a little better break because of grip with his curveball. So these are all tools. And so coaches are so good now that they can, as long as you're not living by all these readings and new way, as long as you stay with the basic fundamentals of pitching, balance, rhythm, timing, being able to pitch on a downhill plane, pitch up when you want to pitch. It still comes down to what pitch am I throwing and where do I want it to end up? It comes down to that. And how do I time my body for maximum efficiency to do that? And so that comes down to what Tom Seaver did. It comes down to what Bob Feller did, you know? So there's certain things you can't improve on if your delivery is sound. And obviously the technology is something to look back on. Okay, look at the film after a game and see what I did wrong. Wrong. You're already saying, what did I do wrong? How about looking at the film and see what you did right first? What are the things I did right? We're always looking for the things that we do wrong. And I was just always thinking, players look at this thing backwards. So I don't know if I could coach today. I don't know. It takes a far more intelligence than I have. I have, old intelligence. I don't have this newfound intelligence.
But you make up for it in passion, and that's also an important part of coaching for sure. There's no question about that. And the one good thing is like, and it's amazing to me, like right here on Long Island, Craig Hansen, former Boston Red Sox, he coaches 15-year-old kids that take lessons. Like all throughout the country, there are ex-major leaguers that are teaching these kids at such an early level the high baseball pitching IQ, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So it is really something special to watch. All right, guys, I know Steve and Tuller, they're kind of pissed at me. I stole a couple of their questions, so I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm going to turn it over to the Zoom room. You can do it old school. You can raise your hand that way, or you can use the raise hand function and then wait till I call on you. I'll ask you to unmute, and this is your guys' opportunity. This is what I love about the show. This is when I get to sit back and listen to better questions than I could ever construct. So who wants to go first? All right, Stevie, he's raising his hand. Go ahead, Stevie.
Sure. Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Steve.
Good. So for me, in meeting players that I idolized when I was a teen and was so in awe before I met them, and then when I actually got to sit down and talk to them, then I was amazed at who they were as people. For you coming up as a young player, as you said, you're a fan, and was there any player that you were in awe of that then you said, "Wow, this guy is awesome," and I love hanging around him?
Well, I grew up on the West Coast, so so many of the Met players, East Coast guys. Tom Seaver played on the East Coast. Never really met him. Jerry on a farm in Minnesota, Grody in Texas. So they were all strangers. I did meet Seaver before I really met him in my very first spring training, because this is when The Godfather was debuting. So I kind of ran into him in the lobby. I knew who he was. He had no clue who I was. And so we were waiting for everybody to go to their seats. And my wife elbowed me, says, "Is that who I think it is?" I says, "Yeah, but be quiet. I don't want to." So I knew who he was. I knew what a great pitcher he was. And so he was kind of maybe my first, other than just being a baseball fan, growing up on the West Coast, Sandy Koufax. Everybody loves Sandy Koufax. Mm-hmm. But as a professional athlete now, seeing Tom Seaver in flesh and blood right there, wearing his seersucker clothing. So that was exciting. Too nervous to say hi to him, though.
But did it change when you came to the Mets and when you came up, or was it?
Oh, definitely, because he's the one. See, in baseball, I was never called Bob. I was called Dak. He gave me that name. He didn't want to call me Apodaca, so he cut it off at Dak. So that name has lasted, geez, 50 some odd years. And players, when I finished coaching, were all calling me Dak. So
That's
everybody
awesome.
in the baseball world called me that. So he was the one who named me, and um, I was a minor leaguer when I met him, but when I finally got to Major League camp, he made me feel very, very special, even though I was a butt of some jokes and things like that. You got to expect that,
Mhm.
but it's out of love. That's what I was like. He loves me. He loves me. That's why he's joking with me.
Awesome.
Before I go to the next, Tuller, you'll be next. But it just dawned on me that I can't believe I didn't ask this question. But when you mentioned that guys called you Dak instead of Apodaca, I'm just wondering your interactions with Ralph Kiner on Kiner's Corner. Do you remember being on Kiner's Corner? What it meant to you, and did Ralph butcher your name?
Oh, of course. Um, but I wasn't going to correct him. Um, uh, because as soon as you walk in, he gives you a $50 bill. So I'm not going to correct. And $50 was a lot of money then. And it was freezing in that room after a game. Freezing. It doesn't matter if it was April or August. Because that's where all the TV monitors were. So, but it was special to be invited on Kiner's Corner, and that's the way I always treated it.
All right, Michael, go ahead.
All right, Bob, thank you for talking to us tonight. Um,
Absolutely, Michael.
my question for you is actually building on the Tom Seaver thing. In 1977, I'm assuming you were around when he was traded.
Yeah.
What kind of effect did that have on you, and did it, on the staff in general, the pitching staff, I mean?
Um, you know, there wasn't all the news outlets that there are today, where minute by minute what's going on. All you knew what was happening back then was what you would read in the papers and things like that. Didn't know it was to the point where um, Tom wanted to leave New York because of certain things happening, coming out of the Daily News. Um, I think Tom was underappreciated back then. I mean, who gets a cut and pay? That just doesn't happen to a three-time Cy Young winner, not in my lifetime. So not having all of the facts leading up to that, and then that happening, I believe, God, were we in Atlanta? We might have been in Atlanta when that happened, and it was a total shock. Him and Kingman, I believe, were all traded that day. I didn't care who we were getting in return, but we weren't just losing a Cy Young, three-time Cy Young. This was the face of the New York Mets. This is, if you had issues, he would be the first one I would always go to and talk. If I had problems, he would be the first one I would go to. I never approached him as far as with problems, but I wouldn't hesitate to go to him because he was an authentic person, and you had issues, he wanted to help you, and he always helped me with baseball stuff. If I had baseball questions, never hesitate. But it was I was in shock, just like every other member of that team when that happened, and it took a long time, I think, for us to recover from that. You don't recover. You don't recover losing somebody of that magnitude, because his pitching. I mean, he excelled after that. He still excelled after that. He won his 300th game with another team, which that's sad. Yeah. That's sad. Throwing a no-hitter for the Cincinnati Reds. It never happened.
All right, Michael, thank you. We got a newcomer to the room. All right, Paul, go ahead. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Paul.
I met you back in the early 90s at Buddy and Steve Zabrisky's fantasy camp,
Oh,
and you were amazing down there. I loved it. I loved you and
play?
Clint as a team
Oh, really? Clint and I were together?
all the time.
Yeah,
He was the head man at the camp.
right.
Um, and it was amazing
Yeah, we
what
had
you guys.
a ball. We had a ball.
So the question that I have is, you had mentioned how you strengthened your body that one season, and you were saying that the ligament, you don't like you can't strengthen ligaments and other parts. Do you think the players nowadays, because they're getting similar type, those injuries, are over strengthening their bodies?
Well, they're throwing um, weighted balls, first of all, trying
Okay.
to gain velocity. And the jury is still out on that. They're gaining velocity. It's working. It's working. They're gaining velocity. There's no question about that. Um, Probably the strengthening programs are so advanced now than in my day that all this aids into and the athletes they're bigger guys too. So and heavier muscled naturally guys too. So they're doing things harder, faster than they did in my day. But you're seeing, excuse me, so many injuries, especially the Tommy John seems to be having uh, being reborn again at such young ages. Why? Why is that happening? Listening to orthopedic surgeons is because they don't turn off the game of baseball. They play baseball all year round. They're constantly working on their baseball skills. They're in the gym, if they're in a cold weather place, they're in all these places. They never go from sport to sport to sport. They never allow their body to decompress from the game of baseball. And I heard Dr. James Andrews, maybe the foremost orthopedic surgeon, say that, in my opinion, is the number one reason for all the Tommy John surgeries.
Do you think that the kids nowadays should be a more rounded athlete and just
Absolutely.
not?
Absolutely. Who's to fault for that? Well, the player might just love the game. He just might love it. But I guarantee you there are some parents out there who want to have their kid be a first round draft pick or go to a major college and are going to this school and this school and this school, and they play 80 game schedules during the summertime, and then they play fall ball, and then they're doing these clinics and these clinics. They have all the right intentions, but they're just not allowing them to be well rounded.
Wow.
And I just think the athlete today is getting hurt because of this. We used to play every sport.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, interestingly, if no one long tosses anymore either. That's another thing. That's gone.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Long toss is very. I know the organizations that I've been associated with. That was always part and parcel. That was part of your throwing program was long toss, and in the off season. So they wouldn't touch a ball until, Jesus, if you were a minor league player, probably till around the first of the year. If you were a major league player, they start a little bit earlier in that, obviously, because their spring training starts a little sooner. So they have throwing programs designed for each and every player in the minor leagues, major leagues, specifically for them when they should start. And long toss has always been a part of it.
Right, Sal's got right. So Sal, I actually told you about Sal before we went on air, Bob.
Oh,
Sal,
this is the guy you were telling me about?
yep. Let's see if he's let's see if he's going to pull something out. Every time he's got some memorabilia, no matter who the guest is. And last week, Mackie Sasser actually hopped on like just randomly, and Sal ran to the back and pulled out something. So Sal, what do you got for us before the question? I'm sure he's got something. He's looking. Uh-oh, maybe not.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, we'll start off with the 73 yearbook of the future Met stars. And if you look over here,
I got that picture up here.
Nice.
Oh my God,
so
I
yes,
remember that one. I know all those guys. All played in Tidewater with me.
yes. And Hank,
I do not remember John Glass.
Mm.
was John Glass the one who pitched like 8 innings in the 25 inning game?
No, that was Hank Webb.
Hank did.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember John Glass. I'll have to look. Wow. All right.
Well,
What else you got to
I think I threw the 15th, 16th, 17th inning, something like that. Hung around in the clubhouse for a little bit longer. And then one of the coaches, get out of here. We got a day game or something like that tomorrow. Get out of here. Go home. He says, really? You want me to go home? He says, go home. So I lived out in Long Island, out in the Glen Cove area.
Mhm.
So I drove out there. Takes, 25 minutes to get back out there. Let me turn the TV on. Boom, game's on, watching the game. I watched the end of the game. I saw Hank Webb try to pick off Bake McBride at first base. And that son of a bitch scored from first base on an overthrow.
throw?
The other part, I have an official.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
My signature. That is it. And maybe the ugliest picture I ever took. Thank you, Sal.
But that's why you drew over. Right? Then my favorite is in '74. You had your rookie card.
Yes.
But you spelled your name wrong.
Yes. Yes. And that's why it's my most valuable
Apodaca.
one. That's what, can you imagine? That's why it's my most valuable one, because they spelled it wrong.
One of my favorites.
How about Kuzman's rookie card? Why is it so valuable?
A bunch.
Nolan Ryan, baby.
Because Nolan Ryan is on it.
And that's still the koozie card,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you gonna have Jerry on your show?
I'd like to. I've interviewed Jerry for a number of my books. I mean, Jerry, to this day, I have to say that he might have told me my favorite story ever. And actually, after the book came out, I actually put the audio because to hear him tell the story all these years later with the joy. And so he basically, I don't know if I've ever told this on air here, and most Met fans have probably heard this story, but the way he told it was phenomenal. So he was once on an airplane and he was looking at the back of the Sporting News. And the back of the Sporting News back in the 70s had all these different advertisements, like some stuff for strength and conditioning, some other things. So there was this thing called Magic Mike. This is before the movie. All right. So basically what it was this microphone that had a wireless transmitter. And if you were like 25 feet from a transistor radio, you could set the frequency to 89.3 and you could broadcast over the radio. Tom Seaver had, quote unquote, the locker room radio. The producer of the Mets telecast at that time, I believe his name was Jack Simon. He's actually a relative of Jason Alexander, the actor. But evidently he did a spot-on Howard Cosell interview. All right. So Jerry came up with this whole idea.
You knew he was going to be up to no good.
Right. Yeah. So he came up with this whole script about how that Tom Seaver and Ed Kranepool were traded to the Houston Astros for Doug Rader and a pitcher that the Mets always lit up. I forgot who it was. So he was about 15 steps from Seaver's locker to the back of the training room where he put Jack Simon. He said, count to 15. And when I give 15, just start reading this. So Kuzman walks over to Seaver's locker, turns it on, whatever, and then Jack Simon comes over and he starts saying, "Right, we have breaking news, WABC. This is Howard Cosell from the World of Sports. The Mets have traded Tom Seaver and Ed Kranepool to Houston." Now Seaver, he said, turned white as a ghost. He said Ed Kranepool is throwing stuff in the locker room, saying those motherfuckers, just cursing up a storm, right? And then, M. Donald Grant is in there and he runs out like he was, "What radio station is that?" And he runs out. Now Kuzman realizes, he wasn't planning on M. Donald Grant being there. He says, goes in, crumples up the paper, tells Jack Simon, "Don't say anything about this ever," right? And whatever. No one knew what happened, what the genesis was. Years later, when Seaver gets traded, the first game back, it was the Mets versus the Reds, and it was Kuzman versus Seaver. I think they split the first two games. Both of them pitched 1 won 4-2, one lost 4-2. So Ralph asks, he goes, "You guys have been teammates for all these years. You must have had some great stories." For some reason, Kuzman, says he decided to come clean on the air. And as he's telling the story, the producer is getting a tighter and tighter shot of Jerry's face as he's telling the story. And as he's relating the story, all of a sudden, Tom Seaver looks at the monitor and he sees that he's just out of camera range. He leans into Jerry and he goes, "I'm gonna kill you, you mother effer," right after this show. And Kuzin has to keep a straight face, but to hear Jerry tell it years later with the joy and he cracks up during it, is one of my favorite stories.
Oh,
But
he was always a great storyteller, great,
yeah.
and was so easy to laugh. He would laugh insistently. He was so much fun to be around, so much fun.
Yeah. Sal, did you have a question, or you just want to show memorabilia?
You actually, you are actually in two eras of the relief pitcher. You pitched in a time when guys would go 2, 3 innings in relief, and then you coached in a time where it was pretty much 1 inning, one and done. Do you think there's an advantage to one or the other? Because I just, a guy throws 9 pitches, gets the side out, and then they take him out. The bum.
I think that was Tony La Russa who first came up with that with, Eckersley. Couldn't hand the ball to a better one. Sure, there's advantages where you're only relegated to throw 1 inning. But then over the course of the season, it's going to catch up to you. That's why it's important that your bullpen has to have a makeup of guys who can absolutely give you multiple innings and more than one guy. Maybe your closer, hell, you want your closer to throw a 2 or 3 inning game in spring training just to build up stamina to withstand that. I mean, Mariano Rivera kind of did that, and he's considered the best relief pitcher that God ever created, and he would do it in the World Series. So I think that's why it's so important that a bullpen makeup encompasses guys who can, left-handed guys who can throw multiple innings, right-handed guys who can throw multiple innings, and I mean like 4 or 5 innings, guys who can go 2, 3 innings, not just 1 inning guys. You get a bunch of 1 inning guys, boy, it's going to be a long season for that bullpen.
Agreed. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Sal. Thanks for taking me down memory lane with that Tidewater Tides picture. That was fabulous.
Thanks.
No wrinkles on any of those faces.
All right. Anyone else have any questions for Bob before we let him go?
Hey, I could do one. Hey,
All right,
Marky.
Gail. Hey, Gail. How you doing?
I'm good. So, Bob, I mean, after a few years of seeing you pitch, we didn't see you anymore. And then I'd start to hear that you're in the farm system as a coach or whatever. What was that transition like to go from being a player to being a coach? Did you reach out to the front office? Did they reach out to you?
This happened in 1981. I tried coming back from the injuries that I had, and I happened to be in Jackson, Mississippi in AA, and Davy Johnson was the manager. And so 2 surgeries, the guy with the bat in his hands told me that, no, you just don't have it anymore. And so I went into the office and Davy says, the Mets are going to release you. And Chris Kager was the farm director then. And he happened to be on the phone and he said, "But Bob, we want you to stay in the organization as a pitching coach." If he doesn't say that, I don't know what direction I'm going to go, Gail. I really don't. It would have been devastating to hear that news that you're being released anytime you're fired or let go from your only team that you've ever been with. And but then that spark in the end of his sentence saying, "But we want you to be one of our pitching coaches." And so that you're wanted again. So that made me feel good, but I wasn't just going to put a coach's uniform on. I wanted to be good at it. wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference without notoriety. So that's why I always try to talk to people that were far smarter than me. And that's I was in baseball for 50 years. Only 10 of it was as a player. I had 40 years as a coach. I wish it was the other way around, but I know that's impossible. But I wish I'd have had far more years as a player. But saying that I was 40 years as a coach, I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, and everybody remembers your name in a positive way. So
yeah, how
mission
could you forget
accomplished.
that name? I remember Bob Murphy, or maybe it was one of the Atlanta announcers, and he says, "Folks, can you imagine if Bob Apodaca is pitching to Biff Pocoroba, how that would affect an announcer during a 9-inning game?" So there was some tongue-tied name. The catcher for the Atlanta Braves was Biff Pocoroba, and then he threw my name in there. So it was kind of it's a name that that people kind of remember. Sometimes not for good reasons, but they remember a name.
And Jane Jarvis had some fun with it also, right? Didn't she?
Oh, the monkey song.
Yes.
Yeah.
Said the monkey to the chimp, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's interesting walk up. It's a little different than Timmy Trumpets and Narcos, right? Just a little bit. Bob, thanks so much for doing this tonight. It's always great talking baseball, but you were so engaging, such a great storyteller, such a great ambassador for the game. And this is what we love to do when winter night. Baseball's right around the corner. Couldn't think of a better way to spend an hour. So thank you so much.
Mark, thank you for everything, including to get me on the program with the computer. And because I couldn't have done it without you. Again, tell Skip Lockwood I said hi. I give him my best wishes for me.
You got it.